Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm here with Peter Scalzo, our host of Cancer and Peace, and we're sitting in our newly set up recording studios upstairs in the campus of the CBF office. And so producer Jack is now playing with new equipment that he has set up here in some manner, a new setup, and we're excited to be here.
Yes.
Then
Very
we're going to do a
excited.
part 2, right?
Absolutely.
And so, well, welcome to the studio. And
Yeah, beautiful. Great job.
great
you guys.
job, Jack.
Jack, thank you.
Producer Jack, yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
Doing his job again. He's not even paying attention to us. Why do we call him producer? He doesn't even pay attention. So weird. He's not behind the glass over here, though. So last time we left off, we talked about this concept of going back to go forward.
Yeah.
And we were just having a lot of conversation about, the importance of it. And when we did that, one of the questions that was kind of on the surface was, is it navel gazing? This idea of, are we just so focused on ourselves that we can't see the world around us, is what navel gazing would look like. And then producer Jack had raised the point about not getting stuck there. And so that was one of the key things, that we didn't want people to get stuck there, but you have to go back to go forward. And so there's something that has to be thought about and worked through. And so today, what we had left last time was that there would need to be active steps. Wow, the new studio rumbles every night, doesn't it? just slightly. And so we can't just sit in the same place. We have to go forward. And there were things that you would want to do once you've gone back. And so I'm going to throw it over to you just so that you can kind of throw some of the concepts you think is good to talk about in this space.
Yeah,
from where we're at.
And also, just as a reminder, something that I learned when I started my own recovery journey, and we like to call it the inner journey, because it's a journey inward. All these quotes from old guys, Augustine, people like that said, to really know God, you have to know yourself first. And then, of course, Pete's quote, Scazzero's quote, which is basically, you do violence to yourself if you're living for the expectations of others and you're not your true self. And so I can honestly relate to those quotes. I can say that for me, the inner journey has been one of finally getting to know the real Peter, taking the mask off, and absolutely part of that process of getting to know myself through recovery and other tools, but it's that 12-step process. And so going back to go forward was an essential component of that process to know myself. And I love, again, Pete's quote, which is, you can't, Jesus may live in your heart, but Grandpa lives in your bones. So just to state the overall value of going back. And so, we did discuss the inventory piece, knowing those character defects, the balanced inventory, the positives, the negatives, those things that I need to work on last time, right? We talked about that last time.
We did. We talked about an inventory, and that was where you would take a person, place, thing, and events that happened that impacted your lives, and looked at what that event was and what kind of things would happen to you, the damage. But ultimately it got to what was your response to that? And it may have been to be closed off, to cut somebody off, to disengage relationally. But there's something that you probably, in those bigger events of your life, that you have a part in, and that is ongoing too.
Yeah. And yes. And I think for me, the understanding of the fact that my higher power is Jesus Christ, but it's that I've been placed, we all have, but I've been placed in a certain family, in a certain address, in a certain state, in a certain nation, at a specific period of time. And that was his design to do that. And so those events of living in brokenness, right? A dysfunction, we all have dysfunction in our families. To get out of the blame game, to recognize how I've been hurt and to process that, but then to learn from it about myself. And And that's just been a great, that whole journey of understanding that God placed me right in the grand story of humankind. I've been placed in this particular place. But then when I get peace with myself, doing the inventory, like, okay, what's my part, and what's my inventory list? What are the items? What are the things, the character defects that I need to work on and process them? And for me, it was to journal. I experience unhealthy anger when I want to control a situation, it's not working out the way that I want, right? And so actually crafting a prayer that gets at the root of the truth, God's word, but also my response to God's word. Like, hey, Lord, I don't like it when I have unhealthy anger. I don't want to control people. I want to accept people where they're at. That serenity prayer concept, taking the world as Jesus did, as it is, not as I would have it. That kind of a thing. And so processing all that, getting healing in that area, and of course, always working on my character defects. But that peace with others part of it, of going back to go forward, that the amends process in the 12 steps to me is is really probably the most challenging part of it.
Excellent. I knew that's what we were going to get into that a little bit today. And I want to put a touch more, I'm going to call it structure around it, philosophical structure maybe. And I think we'll see if this identifies with you, because you started out saying, hey, we're doing something we call the inner journey here. And we're getting ready to make a transition though. And it's in what we would call 6-step discipleship. The inner journey is a stage, and that is the going back stage. And so I'll just lay them out, because people on the podcast haven't heard of this, but we think of a faith journey, and for us, it's a Christian faith journey. But whatever faith journey you're on, it's a profession of faith. It's hey, this is my faith. This is what I believe. And that starts you. That's step one. You've connected with where you're going and what your beliefs are. And then the next thing is to learn the tenets of the faith. What are the things that you do in that faith? What are the basics of it? And get that in you, the practices of the faith. And then the third phase becomes you begin the active life. And that is you start serving, you get engaged in whether it's church life or community life or something like that, you get serving. And as your active life happens, then the wall comes. And the walls are those crisis events, whether they're cancer, death, relationship breakup, these big walls. And so you, in prior podcasts, defined 3 big walls in your life. And I'm sure you'll talk some more about at least one of those today. And that's an invitation to do the inner journey. The wall is an invitation to go on the inner journey. And so the inner journey is what we talked about last time, is going back. I'm going to take inventory. I'm going to look at my life, and I'm going to understand the impact of person, places, events, and things, and what they've had on my life. And I'm actually going to understand where I'm at. Am I angry, bitter, sad, resentful? Where do I sit with all those things? That's the structure. And now we're going to step into the 5th leg today. And the 5th leg is not the inner journey. It's the journey back outward. It's the outer journey. And so as you start making the outer journey, you actually have to make steps outside of yourself. It's not just looking at my navel, talking about what I feel. I'm actually going to have to go engage. And I like the way you just define something there, because the first part of it is being ready to make that step. When we teach this in recovery, it's like there's a ready step. And the ready step is the point in your life where you move from an understanding of what you need to do to an active engagement. And I got to teach about this just a few weeks back, and it was kind of an interesting thing. And I remember mentioning Benjamin Bloom with his modern educational principles, and he talked about kind of a 5-part model for him. And the first part, was some level of awareness. The second was an intellectual understanding and agreement with the concept. But he said the hardest part on the journey was to actually put action to the process, to the steps.
Mm.
And most people, they will come to an intellectual understanding of what needs to be done or where they're at. And that would be like us getting stuck in, I've done an inventory. I know I feel bitterness, and stopping there,
Mm.
and that's what we don't want to have happen. And that's why producer Jack raised this the other day. Is like, hey, don't get stuck in, if you just stay in depression land, you're going to probably hurt yourself worse. If you just stay in, I'm bitter, I'm angry, I'm resentful, you're going to hurt yourself worse.
Mm.
And so today, what we wanted to get to on the going back to go forward is the to go forward step. And that's the outer journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so you started raising one thing is being ready. And so you have your inventory and you became ready and you started
Mm-hmm.
talking about making a prayer.
Right.
I love that because that's kind of the point of you're saying, hey, I intellectually ascend to that I need I see my problem and it's a moment of letting go and a surrendering it to God.
Right.
And it's also a beginning of relying on his power.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're letting go of your power and you're taking on God's power,
Mm-hmm.
is what these prayers are about. And you're
Yeah.
relying on God's promises.
Yeah.
And so what a great step. It's like once you start letting go of, I'm going to rely on Sean power or Peter power, or your personal power,
Mm-hmm.
and start relying on God's power. That's like the first baby step forward
Mm-hmm.
in, starting to do this active outer journey, because it's outside of you that you're seeking, healing and recovery and restoration and peace,
Right.
if that makes sense. Yeah.
It does, and how it resonates with me right now, again, is Matthew 5:3 is when Jesus stands up to give his platform, and he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." To me, poverty of spirit means that I accept my brokenness, I accept my powerlessness. I know that I'm broken and powerless, and that what you were saying, I'm going to surrender all these pieces to Jesus Christ and let him live in me and through me. I don't know how else to say it than
Yeah.
that, but that's really great. And I think, like, as I struggle, like you mentioned resentment, bitterness, and kind of dwelling in a place of hurt or maybe something like that. So I've struggled with that, and at times struggle with resentment. And I like how before we started this episode, you were saying how bitterness and peace can't go together in the same place, and
Right.
I just love that. And I know that that the amends piece is critical for getting to a place of peace in my life, PEACE. And I'm thinking about also that, just quickly, I'll just say that there's so many rich truths within Jesus' teaching, but one of them on just do not judge lest you be judged yourself. But just this concept of, before you even look at the speck in your brother's eye, look at the log in your own eye. And so that's the inventory piece for me. And there's so much peace with that. But then let's talk about going forward with an amends process.
Yeah. Before we get to exactly what amends are, I think there's something to be said. It's like when we were in our inventory, we took time to listen to our feelings and emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a part of it is the concept of old feelings don't die, they get buried alive. So we recognize that unprocessed old feelings are buried alive inside of us. And so that was part of the inventory. And we recognized that we were holding on to bitterness, anger, resentment, or hurts. And so the amends process is really an important part of, first, you have to get yourself to a point where you're ready to, if you feel any one of those negative emotions, of processing that. And so I think the very first part is to actually allow yourself to feel. Because when you feel, then you recognize that, hey, you're allowing that to not be buried anymore, but to be expressed. And so there is an outward expression that is part of this process of allowing yourself to feel, allowing yourself to, it's okay to, you're accepting the suffering. the pain. And so that's like the baby step that's along the way. And then there's the accountability side. And so there's a great story of Zacchaeus in the Bible. And if you're in the, the children's story is like he was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. And but Jesus goes to his house, and he was a sinner of sinners because as a tax collector, he would cheat the people basically to make himself rich. And everybody knew that tax collectors were people who were not aligned with the interest of the people. They were aligned with enriching themselves and connecting with the power of the day for self wealth. And so when Jesus went to his house, people were just like, how the heck would you go to, this person who is, just hurting the rest of us? Why would you do that? And what happened was Zacchaeus' life was transformed in that interaction with Jesus in such a way that he did an inventory. He recognized that he had wronged other people and he wanted to make it right. And you see on the backside of the story, Zacchaeus comes out and he repays. And I think the story is that he repaid 4 times what he had stolen from others for those he knew that he had harmed. And that is a powerful picture. Now, I don't think that there's a requirement that you repay 4 times whatever you've done. And so this is where amends gets interesting. But you see that there was a response on him taking ownership for where he had done harm. And amends is all about taking ownership and, where possible, restoring that which you've hurt, destroyed, or broken. Can't always be done, but in physical cases, many times it can. And it's not just saying, hey, Peter, I stole your car for a while and here it's back. It's recognizing that, well, yeah, but you also caused damage to the car. You took value out of it. It's restoring the value that you've also taken in that process. And when you do that, it opens for clearing. We call it cleaning your side of the street. You have taken ownership for what you've done wrong and you've tried to restore. Sometimes, though, it's just a harsh word and you can't go back and unsay a word. And no matter how many words you put in order, in any kind of order, you can't make that go away. And I think this is such a important understanding, but you can start to take ownership for, I was wrong. And you can ask, hey, is there anything I can do that can make this right because I was wrong? And that moves the needle on trust, at least, where, hey, taking ownership for what you've done wrong begins to clean your side of the street.
Yeah.
And so you've had some experience with amends.
Yeah.
I noticed you kind of had a smile there. You're thinking something.
I was thinking about that I've had probably at least 2 or 3 people who were in the process of passing from cancer say to me, is there anything that I need to say that I'm sorry for, that kind of thing. So that cancer journey is the cancer journey is an invitation to really, people are humbled by it. I am humbled by my journey, and it's a great time to put self aside, like we were saying, and let Jesus sort of come through and say, hey, I'd like to apologize or whatever. But I think the great thing in recovery and making amends that I've learned from the process is that it's totally about what I've done wrong. It has nothing to do with what the other person did. It's recognizing. So I don't go to that person in a blame session. It's not a blame session. It is I just want you to know I'm in a recovery ministry and process, and I've come to make amends for those things that I've done only. And, the other person may not forgive or may walk away or whatever, but that doesn't impact my peace. I have peace because I was able to come to a place where I could say, this is what I've done, and I know it was hurtful.
We say not for them.
Not for them, yeah.
It's all for, the reason why you're doing this isn't because you wanted to get a response from them.
Right.
You're not looking for them to pat you on the back or give
Right.
you a smile or to whatever. It's for you. You're doing this because
Yep.
you are cleaning your side of the street. You're taking ownership for your
Yes.
side.
Yeah.
One of the things that I see in this space is I'll call it a mistake that gets made.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you touched on it a little bit last week. Somebody said, hey, if there's anything
Yeah.
that I may have done wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's wrong to ask somebody, hey, have I hurt you? Don't get me wrong. But there's another side of trying to come at this generic. And it's just say, I think I've hurt you, but I don't know how. Will you forgive me for, something that I actually don't feel like I've ever done wrong?
Yeah.
Is the point.
Yeah.
And amends is all about a recognition that I have done something wrong. I have acted out of anger, or I've hurt you in some way, and I'm taking ownership for my recognition that I've hurt you, and I'm actually saying, hey, I hurt you. And so sometimes you'll hear an apology and it'll be something along the lines of, if I've hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an amends.
Right.
If I've hurt you, it's, I think I've hurt you, and I want to say I'm sorry, and here's how I hurt you.
Yeah. And I think going back, if you've done your inventory list effectively, you know how you've hurt someone.
Yes.
I mean, I knew very specifically how I hurt my wife and my father and other people within my family.
Yeah, you can say, I think I hurt you. Sometimes people
Yeah.
may not feel hurt by something that you did that was hurtful,
Right.
but it's taking ownership for what you believe you've done
Right.
and being specific. And so there's no such thing as this blanket, will you just forgive me for things that I don't even know about? And in one sense, it's okay to be forgiven. I think God forgives us for things that we're unaware of our sinfulness. But amends, the part about getting towards peace is taking ownership for the specifics and being specific. And it's a deeply humbling process because you're having to say, I was wrong. So that's humbling, right?
That's hard. Yeah.
I think both of us have been on both sides of this. And what I mean both sides is I've had to make amends, and it's hard, but man, the other side of it's freeing. And you know what? One of the most beautiful things is to have somebody come to you and say, Sean, I did this and it was wrong, and will you forgive me? I recognize how the impact I believe it had on you. And that melted my heart.
Yeah.
So it does have impact on other people, but that's not the reason why we're doing it. We're not doing it to melt their heart. We're doing it to clean our side of the street and to come to a place of peace for ourselves.
Right.
And so we talked about going back to go forward. You go back and you find these areas where things have been left undone. Old, feelings and hurts have been left unprocessed, and we begin the process of cleaning our side of the street. And it's a process that moves us towards peace. And I know that you've had to do this in your own journey.
Yeah.
And has it moved you toward peace?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, with my kids and my wife, who became my ex-wife. I won't be specific, but we hurt each other, my wife and I, and we were married 36 years with 6 kids. So, we had a great past and really quite a powerful family life, but we mutually hurt each other. And so I had to deal with resentment, unforgiveness, and even a bitterness. I don't know. I don't know if we have much time for this. Do we want to have a third part? But anyway, because this is a whole. But so in order to get to the point where I could make an amends, and I did it through handed a letter and read it. But I not only had to recognize my part, which was the inventory process, how did I hurt, but then the long process of forgiveness.
Yes.
And for the ways that I had been hurt, Not only the ways that I'd hurt, but
Yes.
her, but the ways I had been hurt. And our marriage ended in divorce, and so there was a lot of bitterness and unforgiveness to process, and also because I travel in church circles as a leader, there was shame to process from other people and from myself. In other words, forgiving myself, making amends with myself was a big deal. Making amends with God, like for the cancer journey, being angry at God and blaming Him, and then coming to Him and saying, "This is my part, Lord. I'm sorry." Not accepting, getting to a point of acceptance. Okay, I have this cancer. It's a reality for me, but this is my part. That was big. That was a process that took a while. But I don't know how much you want to talk about the journey of how to process those tough emotions and defects of like bitterness and unforgiveness and those.
Yeah,
kinds of
forgiveness is something that we could talk about for an entire episode
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
And so I think the reason why we wanted to talk about it here for at least a few minutes, though, is to recognize that when we do this going back to go forward, we're left with things to walk forward in to clean our side of the street to find peace. And one is to take ownership for our part. And then once you recognize that you've been hurt, it's learning how to forgive and to walk through those forgiveness doors. And so it's probably an item that we could talk about as a future episode on the process and how to identify that and
Yeah.
when's the right time to communicate things and what just is done in your heart and how do you do that? Because it is a process that you have to walk through to forgive. And it's usually not just a one and done. You can't just say, I forgive you and
Right.
and know that you're forgiven. And I think one of the people that used to listen to on a regular basis would talk about, that you've forgiven somebody when you can pray in your heart, Lord, bless them.
Yeah.
And they, and mean it and know that you don't feel hold back on that. It was
Yeah.
R.T. Kendall that used to say that. And I thought it was such a great
Yeah.
way of thinking about it. It's like, if I can pray, Lord, bless them and not feel about it,
Yeah.
I've got to a point in my heart that I've actually forgiven that person.
Yeah.
And blessing doesn't mean bless them with a curse or bless them with the punishment that they need. It is bless them with your best, whatever that is. God, give them your best.
Yeah.
And that is a place to work towards, of knowing where you're at in the forgiveness process.
Yeah.
So just to give kind of maybe a slight rule of a thumb to think about.
Right. There's places of very deep hurt, like a marriage that falls apart. And I know for me personally, I had to set a very firm boundary in place, which meant no contact except emails, because we did have a child in common. And I mean, we have 6 kids, but we had one that was a minor that, we had to discuss. But I wouldn't have been able to process it with like a daily kind of interaction going on. I needed that boundary. That was just the first part of getting to a point. I mean, to just sort of sit back and think it's going to happen for me wouldn't have worked.
Yeah.
I had to actually intentionally process what had happened and forgive, but do it repeatedly.
What you just described is old feelings that don't die.
Yeah.
That could be buried alive.
Yeah.
And unless you are able to actively work through that and release that emotion and come to a place of forgiveness through the process.
Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or trusting.
Yeah.
And so can I forgive even though I can't forget it and my trust level is in not a good place? And the answer is yes, I can. I can free myself up, but it's not like I forgive you. It's a dealing with, I had to process my feelings of anger and hurt and sadness.
Yeah.
I still have sadness at times for my family That's one emotion that I have to process quite a bit.
Yeah, this is the thing that I think is really important to talk
Yeah.
about is that this is not to get rid of negative emotions. You will feel negative emotions
Right.
for the rest of your life. And so you're
Yeah.
going to have periods of sadness. You're going to at times feel angry. It's actually to learn how to forgive, to clean your side of the street,
Right.
be able to feel the hard emotions, not for staying there, but if you've closed yourself off where you can't feel the hard emotions, you've closed yourself off from feeling the positive ones like joy
Right. You
and
stated
peace.
that, which is really true.
And so that's just like they're a block between
Right.
getting to joy and peace. And so the whole point about getting to peace means that you've gone through that door, you've processed those hard emotions, you're able to feel hard emotions, and then you're also able to feel those positive emotions of peace and joy.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to like put the cancer journey in a box and say, well, this is how the steps should be when you process it. But I do think to get to acceptance of what's happening in my life, I do have to process fear, anger, and sadness first,
Yeah.
right? And then when I get to a point of accepting, okay, right now I'm facing a cancer journey and I'm doing treatment and I had to quit work. Not everyone does, but it became, after my, I don't know what year, after my 14th surgery, the cancer became metastatic. So I had to quit work and go on disability and, start talking about end of life kind of things. So I had to process that, those emotions of fear and anger and sadness and that kind of thing, and grieve and accept it. Then
So
I think
acceptance was the place where you got to. It's a grieving, yes.
it's a
acceptance,
platform for
Yeah.
me, I think.
Yeah.
And then I could launch into, well, let me think about my relationships. I had already been in recovery, already done inventory, already knew about doing a heart check. Am I hurting, exhausted, angry, resentful, tense? So now it was, well, what's a next step for peace? And it was, man, to make amends
Yeah.
is huge. I mean, when I've wronged someone, man, I got a pit in my soul that is deep. It's a hurtful pit. So being able to recognize my own brokenness, my own sin. So I went to that person in a place of humility to say, this is what I've done. It's hard, but it's so fruitful.
Freeing.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Freeing, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. I think we see in certain circles, at least, that this is overlooked in our church context. That the amends process is really important, and the Zacchaeus principle is not you have to do this 4 times over, but there's something important about you may need to make something right.
Yeah.
You certainly need to take ownership for pain and harm that you've caused.
Yeah.
And it's a journey to peace. And you see in that story of Zacchaeus this the joy that he feels on the other side of that, and his freedom, and his freedom.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
think that's
Jesus said, today's salvation has come to this household. And I don't think he just meant, like Christians talk about being saved.
Yeah.
I think he meant freedom
yes,
has come to this household. Healing and freedom.
yeah, that's the piece that we wanted to hear. Is like
Yeah.
the point of us talking about going back to go forward was not to go back and navel gaze. Is
Yeah.
no, there's something important to identify,
Yeah.
connect with, understand why you feel the way you feel, be able to understand and feel the negative emotions, understand where you're holding bitterness that needs to be forgiven, understanding where you've hurt others that you need to walk through that amends door. And as you start doing those steps, you're going to find great freedom and peace in that. And we think the cancer journey is just that point after the third active life where you hit a wall.
Yeah.
And it's an invitation to go in
It's a
and start
great
that journey.
door.
That's the point of our conversation
Yeah.
today.
And I just, if I could add, so I did a podcast with Vision New England about discipleship. It's the main topic that's been going on, and Charles Calder, the guy in charge, has been interviewing a lot of pastors in big churches about what is discipleship. And So I talked about recovery, the recovery process, which is just what we've been talking about today, and he emphasized these like places of like confession. How freeing it is to confess our sins to one another, right?
Yeah.
And I emphasize, well, it needs to be safe, a safe, very safe place. That's my experience. Is I never really confess my sins to another person until I was in a safe place, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about how freeing that is, right? And I'm not sure that really happens in churches. I think, at least I'll talk about the Protestant or whatever.
You mean congregational settings in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think we go to church, we hear a sermon, we do worship, we have a time for offering, and then we leave. So within that setting, there's no place to like have a safe, area to really confess sin that may be on our hearts at that point, And so we talked about how freeing that would be, but then we didn't even get to, in this conversation, the piece about making amends. And, Jesus, I mean, he's like, hey, if you have something against your brother, leave your offering at the altar, go and finish that, settle that first, and then come back. And he even, he talks a lot about forgiveness. And it's almost like we don't really have a place for it.
Yeah, we're asking for that not to get lost in the journey if you want to get to peace.
Yeah.
I'll cap today's with this
do
because I talked about the first 5 steps.
Yeah.
I didn't talk about what number 6 was. And number 6 is ministry out of overflow.
Yeah.
And what that means is if you can do the inner journey and then you start doing that outward journey where you're taking ownership, you make amends, and you get forgiveness and you give forgiveness, you get to a place that we call overflow. And that means those positive things, joy, can overflow out of you. Ability to serve others, not from a transactional basis, but from a love basis, is the 6th part. It's about overflow, and it comes out of you because it's no longer blocked by all the negative junk, and you've cleaned your side of the street enough that something can flow on that side of the street that is beautiful, that is deep and rich. And I think that's what we're asking in this process. To go forward means to go back so that you can go forward in that overflow mode out of joy, love, peace. And those are the positive things that we think come on that journey. And so I think that's where we'll close out today. Hopefully there's a little bit of understanding of what we were trying to communicate with the concept anyway. But thanks for listening.
Thanks, Sean.
Great talking with you,
Blessings
Peter.
to you guys. Yeah.
Blessings to everyone.
Yep.